Welcome to this explainer. Imagine this. We are stepping into a highly unusual, incredibly mysterious setting. Picture a dimly lit, rainy high-rise room right in the middle of a moonless night. Suddenly, portals across time and space tear wide open. Out step 15 legendary fictional characters. We're talking vigilantes, outlaws, aristocrats, all pulled into this one single room. Now, they haven't been brought here to fight it out with their fists or their weapons. Instead, they're here to engage in one profound, high-stakes moral debate. And honestly, the stakes couldn't possibly be higher because they're tackling a dilemma that has literally challenged human civilization since the dawn of time.
So let's just dive right into it. We are dropping straight into the absolute center of the debate with this one. Incredibly provocative question: when is committing a crime justified? It's a question that instantly strips away all the pleasantries. As these characters look around the room, it slowly dawns on them that they all operate outside the law in their respective worlds. But here's the catch. Their reasons for doing so are radically, fundamentally different. The debate that's about to unfold is this fascinating philosophical exercise that's going to test the very boundaries of law, morality, and justice.
To make sense of this absolute chaos, we can actually map the characters out into 4 distinct philosophical factions, moving from really relatable personal motives all the way to increasingly extreme viewpoints. First up, we have the pragmatists, who view crime through the strict lens of survival. Next are the retributionists, who are totally driven by vengeance and punishment. Then we hit a complex clash between the saboteurs and the strict idealists, who debate the actual methods of justice. And finally, we have the most extreme faction in the room, the nihilists, who are basically advocating for total destruction. Let's see exactly what happens when these factions collide.
Let's kick things off with part 1, the pragmatists, looking at survival and inequality.
We start with the most grounded argument in the room, the idea that crime is an absolute necessity when the system itself is what's starving you. Just look at the intense clash of privilege happening right out of the gate. On one side, you have Bruce Wayne Batman, making the case that crime is a choice that fundamentally destroys the fabric of society. He demands that justice must be built with strict rules and solid proof. But then, Selina Kyle, Catwoman, immediately calls out his incredible wealth. Coming straight from the slums of the East End, she argues that the system was actually designed by and for the elite to win. For her, this idea of justice is just a fairy tale for the rich. In her reality, justice is simply a full stomach. She boldly asserts that private property itself is the first actual crime against the poor, which basically makes her thefts a wild, rogue form of wealth redistribution.
You know, what's fascinating is that characters from entirely different historical eras step right up to echo Catwoman's point. Take the 19th century Argentine gaucho, Martin Fierro. He explains how the law literally ripped him from his home, forcing him into military labor for no other reason than being a poor, unemployed worker. So when he deserted just to survive, the law immediately slapped him with the label of criminal. Right beside him stands the legendary Robin Hood, pointing out that the Crown's forest laws suddenly made it completely illegal for starving peasants to hunt or even gather wood, punishing them with amputation or death. Both of them are arguing beautifully that when the law acts like a funnel, wide open for the rich but impossibly narrow for the poor, breaking it is literally the only way for marginalized people to breathe.
Moving right along to part 2, the retributionists, focusing on vengeance and punishment.
Now, the tension in the room escalates dramatically right about here. We're moving away from mere survival and getting into the active, violent cleansing of corrupt systems. Check out the brutal efficiency of this quote from Frank Castle, the Punisher. He steps into this debate carrying a tactical rifle and holding an absolute, undeniable disdain for the idealists in the room. For Castle, the legal system is nothing more than a neon-lit cemetery, a system that allowed the mobsters who murdered his family in Central Park to just walk free. He flat out rejects the entire concept of rehabilitation or relying on legal technicalities. He argues that lethal force is literally the only way to eradicate the disease of crime, laying it out plainly. Leaving a killer alive absolutely guarantees another innocent death. For him, committing the ultimate crime is entirely justified if it permanently ends all other crimes.
But even within this retribution faction, we see a pretty wild spectrum of revenge. On one hand, you have Ellen Patrick, the 1930s pulp vigilante known as the Domino Lady, who specifically targets the corrupt politicians who murdered her father. She views her crimes as a sort of aesthetic repair of society, stealing their ill-gotten wealth just to return it directly to their victims. But then you have Edmond Dantes, the Count of Monte Cristo, who coldly dismisses both her and the Punisher. After being betrayed and rotting in a dungeon for 14 years, the Count argues that true justice isn't a quick bullet or stealing some diamonds. No, true justice is assuming the role of providence itself to patiently, meticulously, over decades, utterly annihilate the lives, the finances, and the very sanity of the people who betrayed him.
All right, on to part 3, sabotage versus order, looking at infiltration versus strict rules.
Here, the debate takes a major pivot. It shifts completely away from revenge and opens up a fascinating tactical disagreement about deeply infiltrating the criminal underworld versus maintaining really strict moral boundaries. Britt Reed, the Green Hornet, and Tony Quinn, the Black Bat, represent the infiltrators. They willingly, purposefully adopt the terrifying methods of criminals, pretending to be mob bosses or completely ruthless vigilantes just so they can sabotage the mob from the inside out. They argue that if you want to throw a wrench into the gears of a totally corrupt machine, you absolutely have to get your hands dirty. However, this philosophy deeply, deeply offends the strict codes of heroes like Batman and Daredevil. They strongly believe that simply playing the role of a criminal inherently blurs the lines of morality and ultimately damages the very soul of justice itself.
So, the real crux of this specific debate is perfectly encapsulated in Daredevil's stark warning. Matt Murdock, a blind lawyer by day who fights crime by night, intimately knows just how badly the legal system fails people in Hell's Kitchen, and yet he passionately argues that even when the system is fundamentally broken, treating the law as something you can just selectively ignore destroys the actual fabric of society. He warns everyone in the room that the exact moment you elevate your own personal morality above the societal consensus, you've completely replaced justice with mere vengeance.
But wait, Oliver Queen, the Green Arrow, aggressively pushes back on Daredevil and Batman here. He points straight at their inherent privilege, arguing that their unshakable faith in the system is a massive luxury, one that is entirely afforded to them by their immense wealth and status. Green Arrow views crime not as some chaotic evil, but as a necessary form of civil disobedience. He makes the case that when laws are explicitly, intentionally designed to protect banks, while simultaneously evicting families, breaking those unjust rules isn't just okay, it's the only way to balance the scales. It forces the elite to finally look down at the streets they've been ignoring.
That brings us to part 4, rebellion versus tyranny, exploring what happens when the law itself is a butcher. We've been talking a lot about street crime and mafia corruption up to this point, but what happens when the law itself is the ultimate butcher? Both Don Diego de la Vega, El Zorro, and Sir Percy Blakeney, the Scarlet Pimpernel, step forward with this undeniable flair of historical elegance. They completely agree that when a sovereign state transforms into a tyrant, deception and crime are not just justified, they become heroic duties. Think about it. Zorro literally masqueraded as a cowardly poet to hide his true identity while humiliating greedy governors out in California. Meanwhile, the Scarlet Pimpernel acted like this completely frivolous nobleman while he was secretly smuggling innocents away from the bloody guillotine during the French Revolution. They both argue that when the law is written in the blood of the oppressed, subverting it through disguise and trickery is the absolute highest form of honor.
Finally, we reach part 5, anarchy and destruction, focusing on the nihilists.
We have officially reached the absolute climax of this entire debate, where the very concept of human civilization itself is put on trial. This raw, incredibly visceral quote comes straight from Conan the Barbarian. He looks around at all the billionaires and lawyers sitting in this room and just laughs at their total obsession with rules. Conan outright rejects the entire premise of human law. He frames crime as a completely imaginary, made-up word that was invented by the weak to protect property they just lack the physical strength to defend themselves. For him, civilization is nothing more than a golden cage of decay. His philosophy is simple. If a system oppresses you, you don't try to reform it, you definitely don't sabotage it from within, you simply draw your sword and you crush it.
And then, somehow, Captain Nemo, commander of the submarine Nautilus, takes this nihilism to an even more terrifying extreme. Nemo doesn't just want to smash a local tyrant the way Conan does. Nemo has fundamentally divorced himself from the entire planet. He views civilization itself, with all its empires, its slavery, and its endless wars, as the ultimate unforgivable criminal. He argues that the system isn't just flawed, it is a literal planetary disease. To him, his acts of sinking the warships of imperial nations aren't crimes at all. No, he sees them as necessary acts of planetary hygiene, a total cleansing by fire and water.
Just picture the room falling dead silent as Nemo utters these chilling final words. He casts himself not as a traditional hero and not as a villain, but as the absolute, inevitable, destructive consequence of a deeply corrupt world.
The exact moment he finishes speaking, the portals suddenly tear open once more, surrounded by huge flashes of lightning and thunder. And without another single word, all 15 characters are instantly violently pulled back to their own times and dimensions. They vanish in the blink of an eye, leaving the high-rise room completely empty, with only the rain still beating against the windows.
So, the grand debate ends without a real resolution. The characters obviously didn't reach a consensus, because, as we've clearly seen today, justice looks completely different depending on whether you are starving in a dark alley, seeking vengeance for a murdered parent, or desperately trying to hold a broken society together. And that brings us right back full circle, leaving you alone in the room to answer the exact same question we started with. When is committing a crime justified? Is it purely about survival? Is it retribution? Sabotage? Or is the law truly a sacred thing that must be upheld at all costs? Take a moment to really think about which of these characters you side with, because your answer actually reveals everything about your own worldview. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, keep questioning everything.